Well, good morning or good afternoon or good evening if you're joining us from the UK. And this is a special edition of Larry Wilson Live with Anthony Panepinto. He's the Senior Director of Health, Safety, and Environment with Procter & Gamble. Welcome, Anthony. You've been on the show before and on many of the expert panels, but thanks very much for coming back.
Thanks for having me.
And everybody, the reason for this special show, Anthony and I had talked about having him back on the show in a few months just to talk about the 5 ways pandemics end and some of the lessons learned and hopefully, some of the positive benefits of that, emphasizing the health part of health and safety going forward. But Anthony called me a couple of weeks ago and he said, Larry, things are really going in the wrong direction with the variants. There is almost invariably a spike at the end of this tail that is worth betting on. And, that's hence the reason for this show. Don't trip on the finish line. There was actually a doctor on TV last night who said, unfortunately, it looks very much like we've tripped on the finish line and we are at capacity. Over 1,000 cases in British Columbia yesterday. I think Ontario is hitting record levels again. Quebec, Ontario have now gone into kind of lockdown. So is Alberta. BC is in circuit breaker. Anthony, I heard France is now going into lockdown as well. So the whole idea, everybody, is 3 months from now, Anthony giving you tips on how to avoid tripping at the finish line is going to be too late. So tell us what's kind of happening all over, Anthony.
Yeah, so in Europe, we're seeing a resurgence in several countries. Brussels closed schools again this week, Belgium closed schools. And again, just as a reminder, I'm looking at about 80 different countries, 157 locations in my role, which is basically during this pandemic doing infection control and prevention for the company. So looking at preventative health measures and looking and tracking what's going on in the communities, because what we've seen is the community risk and our risk is one and the same. It's where you live and work. And there's lots of stories there. So we're seeing resurgences in Europe. We're seeing, again, Brazil in a resurgence at this point. Not many countries are under control. And in the US, it's sporadic. We've seen, upticks in Pennsylvania and Florida, New York. And you may have heard last night that there's some assertion that there's actually a New York variant developing. But and B117, the British variant, is beginning to take hold in Europe and the US. And that one has some interesting features, including that what we see is we see a higher level of risk from potential for exposure, because you actually, if you have the B117 variant or the British variant or UK variant, you actually build more viral load in your nose. So therefore, if you're sneezing, coughing, without benefit of public health measures, a mask and distancing, you may be putting, more people at risk if you're in indoor congregate spaces. So the common message here that I'm giving to my constituency, the people I serve within P&G, to friends, family, and you today is this isn't over yet. So we've got to, we've got vaccines coming. Vaccine deployment is going differently in different countries. We really need that to take hold and to move this forward. But we are where we are at this point, and so I just wanted to give some perspective on where things stand and what we're still doing to try and keep people, their head in the game, eliminate complacency, and really drive forward on finishing this out well.
You were saying just before the show started, this is the third sort of presentation or talk you've done on COVID and complacency in like the last 12 hours or something like that. But just in terms of workplace closures and things, saw a few of them on the news locally last night, having to shut down for 2 weeks. And the site manager was just you could see the frustration having made it this long, and then, now having to finally, shut down. Other people have had to do it. So we want to make sure also, Anthony, if any kind of practical, practical tips for some of the folks watching, in terms of, hopefully not having to do having an outbreak and having to do the 2-week deep clean and stuff like that. But you said, way back when, there's five ways that pandemics end. Can you just go through the five with us there and sort of end up where we're at right now, maybe?
Sure, I'd be glad to do that. So if we think back to the Spanish influenza, that was really generated and spread through the advent of World War I. So we had lots of soldiers from all over the world descending upon Europe, entering into foxholes and trenches. And so you had a right means to spread the Spanish influenza, which was a severe pandemic. Was a seasonal variant over a couple of year period, and you had also this great immigration occurring from Europe to the U.S. and Canada, which helped to spread that. And in fact, I lost relatives who were transiting from Italy to the United States and immigrating here, who actually died on the ship on the way over from the Spanish influenza. The way that pandemic ended, it simply burned out. World War I was over. The immigration had really started, the mass immigration had started to wind down. And so the virus ran out of people to affect. And so SARS-1 in 2003 was very similar. The public health measures worked so effectively that essentially it was contained. And to give credit to SARS-1, sorry to give it a life or a personality, it wasn't nearly as transmissible as other viruses. So there was an advantage to the public health measures and controlling that. So that's one way these things can end. The second way is, and you've seen some of it, is there's a tolerance developed, the risk acceptance. Well, things have gotten better and we can manage it and it's okay. And so I use the best example is some of the commentary from the states of Texas and Mississippi. Well, we got to get the economy back open and we think we can manage it. And risk is tolerable, and the public can grow to accept a certain level of disease. After all, we have a certain level of flu, a certain level of common cold, and other diseases which we accept. And so tolerance is another way. A third way is that we get medical measures in check. Nobody's getting severe disease, being hospitalized because we have effective pharmaceutical intervention. So that's another example. So there have been flus where we control that. Polio, and then we have the case of polio where we got polio under control, haven't eradicated it with vaccines. So vaccines can get things under control, but you still have outbreaks of polio along the Mediterranean where not as many people vaccinate their children against polio. And then we finally have this ideal state where the vaccine completely eradicates the disease. And in the modern era, the only thing that we've been able to do that for is smallpox. So I remind people, it was in the 1890s the vaccine was first developed. And it took until about 1980 to eradicate smallpox off the planet. So those are the 5 ways that generally these things decline. And this may be a mixture. And it could turn out that in the end of the day, my projection, and I may be wrong, is that given what I'm seeing, this could become like the common cold. We get enough vaccine prevalence in the world that severe disease goes away. Certain unvaccinated people are still out there, but there's not enough people to transmit this in a significant way that this virus hangs around, much like the coronaviruses that cause the common cold. And so we, every now and then we get a resurgence. The average adult in the United States gets 2 to 3 colds a year, and most of those don't cause anything but a minor challenge to us in terms of how we feel for a few days. So those are some thoughts on decline. Where are we today? Well, we are, early in vaccine deployment around the world. And I want to remind people of a couple of things. this vaccine has been shown to be, the vaccines that are available and approved out there in circulation have been shown very effective at, in terms of preventing severe illness and death. So that's always the goal of vaccination, is to protect the population from those very serious effects. One of the things we do know is generally vaccines don't prevent the vaccinated person from acquiring a mild form of the illness or potentially transmitting it to others. So that's one of the things that I'm getting most frequent question. Well, I'm vaccinated, so right, I can go visit my mother, I can go do what I want, I can go to Disney World, and clarifying that the efficacy has been measured at a high degree for preventing you, the vaccinated person, from getting severely ill or dying. It doesn't mean that you can't acquire the infection and transmit it on to others. So I think we're still in this declination phase. Vaccines are not a good leading indicator of decline of a pandemic, because you've got to get enough of the population vaccinated that you decrease transmission, and we're simply not there yet. I don't know if it's 70%, 80%, a lot of talk about herd immunity, but that's kind of where we are today. So we're not done with this, and what I want to encourage everybody to do, as you and I talk, Larry, is stick with those public health measures, especially in the workplace, where we create a congregate situation for people for 8 or 12 hours, depending upon shift length.
Yeah. I mean, I heard that again on the news this morning, and I thought to myself, I wonder how many people are unaware. I don't want to say under the illusion, that sounds so negative, that if you are vaccinated, that you can't pass it on to somebody else. Now, if you have already had COVID, can you still pass it on to somebody else, even if you have the antibodies, or is it just the vaccination?
Yeah, so I mean, neutralizing antibodies, or antibodies to COVID, they protect you. I think it's still unknown whether, we do hear of reoccurring cases, while minor in terms of number, but certainly if you can be reinfected, you can potentially retransmit, but it's not to a great deal of that we see data out there. And again, the three uncertainties about vaccines or naturally acquired immunity because you had COVID, we don't know durability. So how long does that, that immunization or that protection last? The second thing is we don't know over the long term whether we'll need boosters at this point. So you hear some things in the literature about boosters for Pfizer, and we don't know that because, I mean, realize these vaccines were created months ago. Clinical trials were put through in small but relevant safety and efficacy trials. And we're finally getting to a point where we have significant, deployment. 15 million doses of AstraZeneca have been dispensed in Europe, for instance. So we're finally getting numbers in the study levels that we have better data to understand. And then finally, this issue of variants. So what really happens with variants? So again, B117 in particular, you hear about that most, but there's the Brazilian variant, there's the South African variant, but B117 poses a really interesting problem in that what we see is a higher viral load. So if you want to index it into an illustrative model, if the regular, and I use the term regular COVID, it has an infection level of 1/4, the B117, just using this as an illustration, don't quote me on the fourfold factor, but it does appear that you can build viral loads. One could theorize that your time spent with someone who has B117 should be 1/4 to get the same dose of the virus that you would with the old variant. So it's an exposure problem. I don't want to oversimplify it, but that's how I think about it as an industrial hygienist. And so that's why public health, go ahead.
Well, no, just recalibrating that sick. Oh gosh, how many hours, or like 12 minutes or something like that in contact, or 6 minutes of contact with somebody when you might be closer than 6 feet or something like that. I should know all of the technicalities, but how so that time period, everybody needs to sort of maybe take that down by a quarter, like, by 20, like 75%, you mean?
Yeah, so exactly. So think of it this way, the minimum infectious dose can be achieved by a long exposure. It can be achieved by a high output by the person that is infectious, or it can be achieved by you relaxing the public health measures, getting very close, not wearing a mask, not having the person that's infected, putting out infectious particles, wear a mask. So that's why these public health measures, especially in indoor congregate spaces, are so important. And I'm not suggesting that we change our public health measures based on the British variant. I'm suggesting that we should continue to emphasize it based on the understanding of the differences that these variants may create for us. And again, can't stress enough, it is the reason to believe, to try to eliminate as a safety professional that complacency, that people are getting tired. I understand. I get yelled at, I will use the term loosely, yelled at 10 times a day about masks. I am the figurehead of mask wearing at Procter & Gamble, and people get upset with me. I don't want to wear this anymore. When can I come into the office and not wear it? When can I come into the factory and not wear it? And that's why, I had 2-hour-long sessions this morning to talk this very topic, and 3-hour-long sessions yesterday talking this very topic with the various regions around the world, because I think I empathize with people who are tired. That drives complacency. And then we have this other factor as safety professionals that we're dealing with, which is complacency driven by inconsistency in messages.
Well,
So,
it goes, it's like, I would say, the bellows fueling the fire. I mean, you and I were talking about this the other day, that you start off, obviously everybody was keenly aware, but just like we talked about, they don't have a lot of skills with invisible hazards, a lot of mind not on task errors naturally, but it's hard to know because, unlike cutting yourself, you don't get feedback right away with a virus. But then, if you go along a little further in time with complacency, typically it starts to affect people's decision making, and you add a little rushing, or you add a little fatigue to it now, and people will start with the normalization of deviance, right? Well, it's okay this once, but then the next time it's a little easier, and it's easy to see our politicians. All just 3 weeks ago, almost every premier said, we've got to relax. The people have got to go out. They're stressed. The mental health, the businesses, and all the healthcare professionals are saying, no, we got these variants. It's going to be huge. And of course, the medical professionals was right. And now all these things are, going back into a much more sort of severe lockdown than where they were before. So it really does follow that complacency continuum. So when you're talking to your folks, Anthony, are they getting to see that part now, like that this is kind of predictable, even though it's super serious still?
Yeah, and I think that folks are finally getting that message. It's a challenge because we all deal with a constituency in our companies, and even I get phone calls from personal friends who, what do you mean that the vaccine doesn't prevent me from getting infected and preventing other people? It says it's 100%. And I said, well, you're not going to go into the hospital and die, but you can still get the infection just like you can from the flu vaccine. You can still acquire mild flu and transmit flu to others, even on the flu vaccine. And remember, the flu vaccine is only 44% effective versus the 85 to 90% that these COVID vaccines are reporting. So again, the strategy that we try to do is keep current with the data that's going on in a relevant subpopulation of the world for the various regions. So that's why we do regional calls with folks. We open up our phone lines, we open up our email and Teams lines to people who have questions, and we try to hit those things that are high cycle in the news media. So viral variants, vaccine efficacy, the whole issue, for instance, with Canada the other day, essentially eliminating the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine for people under the age of 55 and putting it in the context of the data. So keeping that message current and staying focused on our public health measures. Even though, I'll cite an example. The Utah governor relaxed mask mandates a few weeks ago. Got to get out. We got to, not have masks. I had people immediately go, well, when are we going to get out of masks? And I reminded people that the governor of Utah has no jurisdiction over workplace health and safety in the state of Utah. OSHA does. And OSHA hasn't said, let's all go out and get rid of masks in the workplace. To the contrary, they issued a national emphasis program on March 12th or 13th that said, hey, we're gonna emphasize worker safety, and we're gonna use our enforcement procedures that are available to us to enforce protection of workers in targeted workplaces in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this contrary set of opinions out there, and ideology has to be separated from science, and ideology and science have to be separated from politics and the will of the people. And so we have a lot of candid conversations. I probably am speaking to people more now than I necessarily did at the beginning, when fear was a factor driving a much larger component of people in our workplace than it is now. Today, it really is, I'm tired, I want out of my mask, I'm tired of not going to restaurants, I just want to be around people. And I'm trying to put into perspective for people, this is what a decline of the pandemic looks like. I got feedback yesterday from someone, well, our 7-day average has gone down by 14%. I said, let's retalk that when you have a 28-day average that has continued to go down and not resurged. And today I looked at that very locations data, and they were having a nice dip downward, and today's data, they're going right back up. And it's about, how do we sustain this decline? And it is the public health measures. It really is distancing. In a meta-analysis of 300,000 cases that have been, transmission cases, they looked at the number 1 and number 2 measure was physical distancing and masks or face coverings as a preventative measure that would have staved off, in those circumstances, the potential or mitigated the risk of the potential for transmission. That's what we're trying to do, is keep this real for people and keep it in front of them based on current events.
Well, Anthony, given all those barriers, the difficulties, right? Okay, even you and I talking about doing this show, is anybody even going to want to listen? Are they going to be too tired hearing about COVID? Even if the reality is we're going to help anybody not trip on the finish line, doing it 3 months from now is not going to help anybody, so it's now or never here, obviously. But what, in terms of advice you might give a safety professional who is very concerned that they've well worn out their welcome in terms of COVID, everybody's tired of it, but they've got to get some form of communication and somehow get everybody to dig in, bump their awareness up. I wouldn't suggest, something in the doom and gloom category. I think there's been enough shock. But well, first tell us what you guys are doing, or what you'd recommend, because I think this is it. I think we all know we got to do something. It's just, here we go again, is not what we want to hear, right? So.
And again, it really is, Larry, that we're using the news cycle to our advantage. So we take something current in the news and we use it as a means to talk to folks.
Okay, so yeah. and just continually to get that part out there.
Yeah.
Then, or?
So we still do. I'll give an example. So we put out regular one-page communications that are relevant not only to our workers but to their families. So I issued a one-page communique on viral variants, why they matter, and why in particular the British variant matters to us in the workplace as well as to their families. We do see a higher level hospitalization with B117. That should be meaningful and relevant to people. As new data comes out on efficacy of masks, we report it. and put it into perspective in terms of our own success in over the past year of keeping people safe, keeping our business open, serving consumers, meeting our charter, to stay open with operations and provide everybody with all the toilet paper that they could want to possibly buy, at home. And I welcome any toilet paper jokes that people might have. I haven't heard them all, I'm sure, yet. So I think that I think it really is, as safety professionals, we always struggle to keep the message fresh.
Yeah. This is a real challenge, though. So no pressure, Anthony.
Yeah, but I do think as much as we've complained, or I should say, much as we've suffered due to the media, the fast news cycle, I actually see it as beneficial, because when something contentious comes up, it gives me something new and fresh to engage people on related to COVID and our safety protocols. And I think to use that to your advantage, it's kind of like judo. You use the force of the media to get your message out there, and give people the relevant message that's relevant to them personally, their family. And I've said this to your the listeners before, and thanks everybody for attending today. Years ago, I got the this arduous thing about it was my turn to do the annual safety calendar. National Fire Prevention Week, Tornado Week. And I wondered if anybody ever looked at my calendar. I know that people are looking at the information on COVID because we've reached into the home. 7.9 billion people on the planet have all suffered from this workplace or public health emergency, in the context of the broader population. This is transformative for us as safety professionals. I said it before, and I see it every day, because generally early in the pandemic, it was all about the workplace. Now I get phone calls from people, my mother had COVID 3 months ago. Should she get the shot? How should I think about this? This is what her doctor said. And of course, I'm not giving medical opinions. I'm citing papers with perspective of medical opinion, and encouraging people to have those conversations with their physician. But that you've hit relevancy with a safety message when people start personalizing that safety message. And I think this is a great opportunity for us to peel back that evasive secret that we've been all striving for in our careers, to make hazards relevant to people. And I think this has given us an opportunity to try some different things. And I think it's really been, in some ways, a positive for safety professionals, because I don't think we were ever that valued in the past within our organizations as we are valued now.
Well, I also think too that there's, by definition, something like this becomes much more personal than, for instance, a grinding wheel or something at the workplace, right? Or a workplace hazard. So the personal responsibility we all need to have to deal with it is unequivocal. I mean, nobody's arguing with this part. And having spent 30 some odd years in the behavioral safety, human factors, human error business, that if the hazard wasn't there, I wouldn't have to pay attention to it argument has been going on for an awful long time, and it's valid. If the hazard wasn't there, you wouldn't have to pay attention to it. But the world is not hazard free, even if somehow you could work in a hazard free world. So it's not like that's the end of it. You've still got to drive home. And I think with COVID and this, I think that gap has finally been bridged for sure. I think people, got that, I've got a responsibility to pay attention, to protect myself, to watch out for where I'm going, et cetera, watch out for the other guy. I think has certainly improved tremendously with the 6 feet, social distancing, and are they wearing a mask or aren't they, and all of that. So I think people's personal safety skills, everybody did step up. And I can't imagine that's ever going to kind of go back as far as it was before. So that's a positive as well too.
Yep.
What about though the next one, Anthony? I mean, you've told me before that, you know, really within 5 to 7 years, but if you had to bet, you'd probably pick closer to 5 than 7, as I recall. Talk a bit about, you know, how this is going to happen again, typically.
Well, I mean, if you look throughout modern human history, I mean, it really is about migration of people that has led to these broad outbreaks and pandemics. I mean, even if you go back a few years ago to, you had this really endemic case of Ebola, and you know, in Sierra Leone and that area of Africa, and it managed to get out, even though Ebola affects people so drastically and so rapidly. The likelihood that they can get on a plane and head somewhere else is minimal. But in this case, people manage to do that. So as we increase human migration, we increase population density, those are all counter to pandemic preparedness. So it means that we have to think about that in that term. So urbanization, spread of people, and just the ability to transport. And I probably spoke inappropriately in a meeting, but someone was challenging me on that. And I said, well, you know, it took roughly, call it 40 hours for SARS-CoV-2 to make it from airports, you know, in Wuhan, China, and Hubei province in China to 40 busy airports around the world and spread. Just imagine when I can fly SpaceX from Beijing and make it to New York in 15 minutes, how quickly I can spread a pandemic. So I think hopefully people have heard, you know, because every time I've wrapped up one of these, you know, SARS-1, H1N1, in the past, we've put our learnings down. We have a post-mortem on what did we learn and what should we incorporate into our pandemic preparedness plan. And then you get a whole new bunch of people in the organization, and they all want to reinvent the wheel when it happens again. So this is an opportunity for us as safety professionals to really, you know, say, hey, here's our key learnings and here's how it applies to the next one. Now I approach the next one when it does occur with a great deal of hope. I mean, we've done amazing things with vaccines and treatments. Synthetic biology, you know, makes a huge difference in the ability to make these RNA vaccines quickly and tune them quickly and do different things, not without risk. We have low-cost wearables and phone applications that can help remind your workers to stay 6 feet apart. So wearables, you know, were developed to play a role in you know, not solving this pandemic, but reminding people of physical distancing. So there's lots of ways that technology has advanced in the past year and a half that gives me great hope. You know, and there's biosensor technology coming out. Now you know, there's biosensors out there that purport to measure COVID in real time. The problem is I don't have a minimum infectious dose as an industrial hygienist to understand how much virus in the air makes a difference. I mean, I know I talked to a company that, you know, installed it in a school. And I said, well, what do you do when the alarm goes off? And they say, well, we evacuate the classroom. Well, and I'm like, well, what does that mean? So I think technology during this pandemic has demonstrated, and the rapid pace of development has demonstrated, you know, a hopeful situation for us as safety professionals in the future, because we'll be much more prepared for the next one when and if it occurs.
Well, given, I was just thinking, Anthony, given what you were saying about how, you know, it's only going to get faster, if you will, world travel, people traveling around, as more and more countries, you know, standard of living improves, more and more people are going to get on planes. So things like viruses will be able to get around the world quicker than they even now. But a lot of airports have already got, you know, temperature monitoring, things like that. Would it actually be, I mean, people might just think that the world's gone paranoid. I mean, should we just keep doing all of that stuff all along? I mean, a lot of it is fairly quick and, the fever stuff and all is almost automatic at some airports. Should we not just keep doing all of that sort of stuff so that there's a much better chance of stopping something?
Well, I think the critical feedback, so there's two things here. One is the public health network worldwide needs to get on the same page so that at the earliest potential for an outbreak, wherever it starts, whether it starts in sub-Saharan Africa with an Ebola type of virus, or it starts as another coronavirus somewhere in the world. I mean, part of the reason we got behind is because people were not communicating what was happening endemically in China and warning us. I mean, I had my first call on January 6th, and at that point I started to go, this reminds me of SARS-1, but I really didn't react until late January. And so, that's one of my chief learnings is, okay, when I'm doing the health surveillance reads, I need to pay more attention to what some people are saying, as a preventive medicine specialist. So, I think there's that piece. And then I do think, we need to be agile and rolling, de-escalating some of these measures and re-escalating some of these measures. So don't throw away all those temperature sensors that you bought for this pandemic, and certainly technology will evolve, but, there's something to be said for tried and true, thermometers in a pinch. And I think we have to have that kind of resilience built into our system moving forward, because again, what is the trade-off? How much do you want to slow the process of checking in at the airport when there's no clear threat at that point in time? So it's about agility and resilience.
Well, that's what and the backlash on the paranoia and the whatever. And I'm like, but if you've got all of the stuff already, I don't want to sound too big brotherish, but it would, the sooner the better. We had a question. I don't know if I get the last name right, Peter. But it was about the passports, I think. And I'm not sure where it went. Any knowledge of the international prevalence of travel passports, or what might happen in terms of that sort of stuff? And I don't know if you'd necessarily know, Anthony, but you can certainly give us your 2 cents worth.
Yeah, I mean, so if I give a bit of a legal perspective on this, I mean, I think the privacy issues with this are still, in contention depending on where you live in the world. And I think to think that, 161 or however many countries there are now can agree on a standard for that, and their populations will agree on the privacy issues, is a bit stretchy. I understand the vision, and in reality, it may or may not be important. I mean, if we get enough vaccination and it's effective and durable in enough people, this thing will likely ratchet down and become something like the common cold. And it'll still be around, I suspect. At least that's my forecast that I'm giving to the people in my constituency and the company. And I'll be the first to admit if I'm wrong in 3 years and it's eradicated. But I think that is it a bad idea? No, but I get really concerned about how you would deal with the privacy issues. And so we're watching it because we have travelers and folks around the world as expatriates working in various countries. And so we're watching it, but I think we're way off from having a universal system, of vaccine passports or travel passports.
Right. Yeah. Well, that, I guess, would then, the next question, when do you think travel will go back to normal? How long would that be?
So I'm going to go out here on a limb and give folks the advice, and please don't hold me to this. This is just some friendly advice. When I have friends who call me who are planning to take their dream vacation, their cruise from Australia to Fiji or something like that, I've said I would not book it before second quarter of 22. I think you'd be premature in trying to do it this fall. I just talked with Mike from Safe Start. He's planning a wedding, and I said, well, you might be able to pull it off this fall. Safe bet is second quarter of 22. So that's kind of looking at the global data, looking at vaccine prevalence and the vaccine deployment strategies. It's a safe bet. Again, I'll be if you call me on the phone in June of 22 and say, Anthony, we're still not traveling yet, I'll admit that I was wrong, but that's simply my forecast based on looking at the data from about 81 countries every week.
Although there's some people who say there is no safe bet getting married, no matter when it is. just kidding, Mike. Just kidding. She's a lovely girl. But anyhow, it's pretty hard to say when everything is going to open up and all. I think, hence the gist of this show. I think we're all tired. I think we are all very optimistic. The vaccine's coming. It's being rolled out, and then you sort of see this very predictable tail end of the complacency thing and the spike. And the difficulty, I think, for a lot of the health and safety professionals that are listening, Anthony, is I know I need to keep communicating. I need to avoid our company, my plant, tripping at the finish line here. But I also think everybody's tired of hearing it all. So the one thing I thought that you seized on a couple of times was find something current and relevant. Try to use that as a bit of a foil. What about advice you give to the leadership groups at your company? I mean, this communication isn't all about you, the health and safety professional. The leadership group's got to do their part as well. Could you give us a bit of how you've coached those folks? And you've still got your job, obviously, right? So, it looks like so far so good. You didn't wear out your welcome. So
one of the groups that I addressed this morning was a leadership group, HR, plant manager types. And I reviewed some local data with them, and I said, this is why, while the government in the United States is generally reporting 7-day moving averages, here, as someone trained in epidemiology and understanding now how this virus has trended across the globe and ebbed and flowed, here's a 28-day picture. And here's how I want you to see the data through my eyes. So that's how I approached that, because there was this tension about, we need to de-escalate now. My state is good. My governor said no masks. And I reminded them softly, OSHA carries the stick here in the US as far as workplace safety. But let's talk about really where your state is. And in fact, let's drive down into the data in the 4-county or 5-county area where you draw your workforce, where you draw your contractors. And let's go, I want you to see the data through my eyes. Okay. And that's the process that I went through.
4 or 5, like where are we in the local area?
Exactly.
Okay, I think that makes good sense. There's a lot of general risk. There's so much noise. Where are you exactly right here? And try to calculate that risk, really. Now, the other thing, is it possible to somehow calculate where your folks are at in terms of their level of complacency within your workplace in COVID? In other words, was it wise to survey everybody? Do you need to kind of give your supervisors a informal verbal thing, like go out and ask a couple of these questions, see how everybody's doing? I mean, obviously we'd go out and asked people on a scale of 1 to 10, could you rate your level of complacency with COVID for me? Where do you think you're at right now? When was the last time you thought about it? How much risk do you think you're at? Just see if you can at least, open up the radar screen again.
Yeah, and we've done some of that. So we've asked it in this way. Basically, one thing driving the public health measures. Do you feel like you have access to enough masks? Is there enough cleaning supplies? Do you feel that you're seeing people following the public health measures? Just very general terms. And then I think the one important question that we ask: do you still believe that you're safe coming to work every day? Because we believe our workplaces, if we execute our protocols correctly, are safer than anywhere in your community. That you could possibly go into an indoor space with people in your community. And we ask people that question: do you still feel safe? And if you don't, why not?
Okay.
And I think that gets to some of what you were suggesting, but it broadens it out to really having an understanding of what makes them uncomfortable. Is it seeing people becoming complacent? Is it, they don't feel that there's enough cleaning. They don't feel, I went to look for a new mask, mine got wet or was wet, and I wanted to change it, and I couldn't find one right away. So we're really trying to get down to that human-centric kind of measurement. And I have to say, our leaders, our module safety leaders, our operations managers, our plant managers, they've done a great job. And they've done some incredible stuff under really tough circumstances. And what I remind them every time I talk to them is the incredible things they've done for 400 days now. Don't drop that because you think things are getting better. Remember, in the US, we have 2 million people that descended upon Miami to whoop it up for spring break. If 10 of them come back to your small town in rural America and start infecting people, you have a problem. We have a problem. And so that's the key messages that I send.
How, and again, I'm always a little reluctant to ask you to be too prescriptive, Anthony, but like once a day, would you recommend your supervisors try to talk to people about COVID once every couple days, once a week as a minimum? Obviously, if you're caring and it's genuine, there's never a problem saying, how are you doing, even more than once a day. But what sort of bare minimum are you trying to at least encourage your folks to get out there and engage with?
Yeah, so once a week, we tend to generate on the P&G homepage a COVID message, whether it comes from our CEO or some other leader, or we tell a story about a site program that's done something unique with their COVID safety program, or they've served the community in a context of providing something to the community in terms of COVID relief, or done some volunteer work, whatever that might be. So you keep that message fresh for all 107,000 people that work for the company. And then you bring it down to organizations. So we, in our office areas, once a month, we do, we still have a significant amount of people who are work from home at this point. So we push out information through a COVID hub. We ask people how they're feeling, what questions do they have. In the factories, it really is up to the factory level. I always take this position. The plant managers and the operations leaders, they know their culture better than I do. I could get overly prescriptive, but I try to push 1-point lessons on various aspects of COVID, send out reminders, send personal messages to people, and really kind of create, if you will, grassroots effort to do this. But I know many of our plants, they talk about COVID on at shift change. Mm-hmm. What's going on in the community? What have we seen in the plant? What are people worried about? So I think people have done that differently. So there's a multitude of ways that you can reach out and I think be effective as safety professionals to your leadership teams, to your operating teams, and kind of mix it up, if you will.
Well, and plus it really helps when you've already got some of the base, like that it's already there. You can just, now it's a different sort of subject, right? The safety habit of the week for people to practice. Well, obviously now you could just add something about the mask, the social distancing, the hand washing, and then the self triggers of the day type of thing. Again, point out places where, again, you might let your guard down a bit in terms of COVID, or you might be inclined to rush, or you might be tired, again, letting your guard down. So if you've already got those things in place, the infrastructure, it really helps to be able to just plug some of the COVID messaging right into those pre-existing building blocks. But not everybody does the sort of shift changeover debriefing thing. Sometimes, sadly enough, at hospitals, it doesn't happen nearly as thoroughly as it should. So again, back to the supervisor. So much. You could communicate out there, obviously, and keep an eye on.
And just one other thing, Larry, a simple exercise that I do is about once or twice a month, I create a 1-point lesson. That's our terminology for a one-pager. And it could be on a simple topic. So last month I knew spring break was coming up. So I put one together on things to consider traveling by car. Before you leave, what to take with you, what you need to be aware of on your route to wherever your destination is, and once you get there, and wrapping those preventative health measures into that message. That's something that causes people to be reminded of COVID. It's something they could take home to their family. And I've had people tell me that they've taken that thing home and passed it out to neighbors. You've achieved a level of penetration of your safety message when people are printing things out for their next door neighbor and saying, hey, you're taking a car trip. My safety guy at Proctor sent this out to us. I think it has some good reminders in it. And again, we've had things flop. We've had things go over well. It's a learning process. So I'm not telling anybody on this call that we've been 100% on target. Right. I think we've done better than for the worse by being overly communicative with people.
Yeah, I think that it's a risk, but I think if you're the risk would be if you're gonna fail in the over communication, not the under communication. I can certainly hear David Bianco from one of our very first expert panel webinars when he said, you just make sure everybody's stressed, just chill, be kind, be concerned, and chances are you'll never really go wrong, right? And I think that message is probably as important now. And I think it's also interesting, or I'd like to ask everybody listening, if they're just thinking about themselves honestly with COVID, how over this period of time it did sort of affect your decision making, and how it does. It really is a predictable pattern, that complacency continuum. The first stage, you're not so preoccupied, so worried. Your mind can wander. You make mistakes. But then after a while, you get comfortable with your mind wandering, and it doesn't matter as much. And the decisions start to slip. Anyhow, I think it was easy enough to see for me, certainly. I think everybody can kind of see it. I don't know what took me so long, but it was sort of talking with you a week ago, Anthony, before, when deciding to do this show, that it all kind of hit me going, yeah, it's quite predictable. We should certainly point that out to people, as well as anything we could kind of think of to help them come from tripping on the finish line, which is pretty much happening right now. But I think the other thing about getting the message and getting your leadership to communicate, and then finally probably the most important takeaway for me, Anthony, was that you focus on your area, the risk, whatever that is, that 4 counties, that metropolitan city that your people 90% of the people come from the community that your people live in, and evaluate the risk there and try to keep that a bit separate from the noise. Anything else that I missed in there, Anthony, that you think?
I think you touched upon it. I mean, I think it's really being a voice of empathy with people, because you have this dynamic of everything from fear to complacency to misunderstanding. And I think, as safety professionals, we've done a nice job over the past year of showing that human side, that empathetic side. And I think that can carry you a long way in reaching your constituency and driving the message home.
Well, Anthony, again, thank you. Well, first of all, it's always a pleasure just talking with you. I mean, for those of you listening, we've spent hours talking about all of this stuff. Kind of the tip of the iceberg, hopefully the highlights for the show. But again, Anthony, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I hope it's helped everybody in terms of, not tripping on the finish line at your particular work site. You got some takeaway ideas. In 2 weeks, April 15th, we'll be going back, if you will, a little more to mainstream safety. My guest will be Hector Salazar. He is the Senior Director of Health and Safety for HMEL at the Batindra Refinery and Mega Project in northern India. I have been there on site. They have over 15,000 contractors coming and going out of a total of about 30,000 contractors since the whole thing started. And I'm not going to jinx it, but so far, so good in terms of not one recordable. So if you want to join us, 2 weeks, 10 a.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific, and 10:30 India Standard Time, we'd love to see you. And Anthony, again, thanks very much for your time, and thanks very much for the advice. And everybody, thanks very much for tuning in. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. Stay well.